All right, cool. All of you sitting in the back of the room, you just in case you don't like it, you can bounce. So, got a little social anxiety going on still? Cool, we get you. So, just a matter of housekeeping. How many of you are New Freedom members? Good, a lot of you. Well, thank you very much for coming out and giving your time to us to share this with you. So, in case you don't know, on Thursdays and on Saturdays, you're welcome to have your family come join you in this meeting and at the Recovery Church. And then also on Monday, Brian and Wayne do a position of neutrality discussion. So if we go too fast here and there's some stuff you want to do a deep dive in, Wayne and Brian and some others will help you with that, okay? But if your families want to come hang out with you during this session and the church session, please encourage them to do so. And if you've never been here before, what we do, we've been doing for lots of years, we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book. And we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances, yeah? In fact, it's been known to improve their behavioral disorders because it restores us from a human condition, not an addicted condition per se. So all kinds of human disorders that have caused us problems can be removed through this power that we access as a result of the process. Make sense? All right. So tonight we're going to take a look at steps 8 and 9. And if you have a book, that's going to start on page 76. How many of you have been blessed with a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps? And it's endeavoring to show others? Yeah, a bunch of you. Very good. First of all, thank you for your service. And second, those of you that are not here, are you planning on asking someone to help you show you the way? Anybody here that's not started on their step journey, but you're considering having someone help? Yeah. Good. So the good news for you is the minute you ask somebody to help you, you humble yourself to ask, you're already in step 12 because you'll help them more than they help you. Yeah, right. The minute you humble yourself, you will be elevated. So, we're going to take a look at page 76. We're in steps 8 and 9. It says, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Do you think that's an accidental phrase? Anybody recognize it? Yeah. So for the alcoholic, they're not trying to teach us a theology, but what they are saying to the alcoholic person who may be atheist or agnostic or a believer who's lost their way, that because I'm a doubter by nature, I'm going to need to prove this power to me, through me, on an ongoing basis. Not some concept, a tangible sensory power, yes? Make sense? That's the only thing. I didn't drink over and over again because the theory of how that shit would make me feel. Right? I was certain how I was going to feel. All right, so let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we've harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. Any of you have such a list? Where did we get it? It says we made it when we took inventory. Why do I call your attention to that? Because rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. So if I can align my experience with theirs, this isn't the people in the fellowship. This is people that are all long dead, but they left us a book, a map to spiritual enlightenment, awakening, that if we follow their direction and pay attention to the experience they describe, this isn't a knowledge-based thing, this is an experiential thing, and then as you have the experience of the power greater than you operating through you, the knowledge will come. Does that make sense? In other words, don't try and comprehend the experience, have the experience and your comprehension will expand. Okay, so then it says, we subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. How many of you did a fifth step? Found it a bit drastic. How many of you haven't done it yet because it looks pretty freaking drastic? Seems like a lot, doesn't it? Self-searching, leveling of pride, confession of shortcomings, which the process requires to bring about its successful consummation, which is the reduction of the ego and the empowerment of the spirit. Make sense? Okay. All right, so now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. So one of the big things misunderstood in modern fellowships is people will say, I'm not going to work with you, you're not willing. Any of you ever heard that? How many of you bounced a time or two? Willingness is divine power. Of course you're not willing until someone's shown you unconditional love. That's my job. My job is to show you unconditional love. Watching you in your addiction is disturbing, but watching me in mine was too. And it was preparation for a testimony that's now freeing thousands. Does it make sense? Okay, so don't interrupt the testimony preparation. Just love on them. All right, so if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. With whom did we make that agreement? In the beginning, that was our third step experience, and then our first step of action was a fourth step, and by the seventh step, I'm asking for agreement with God, and I've already talked to myself and another human being, yeah? So I've made a commitment to myself, to my God, and to another human being, and that seals it on earth and in heaven, right? If you're students of that other book that we keep referencing, right? Okay, so probably there are still some misgivings. How many of you understood the process, saw it worked in others, thought, yeah, not so much? Any of you consider what it was going to take to outgrow yourself? Some of us don't even give it a thought. Somewhere along the journey, you're going to have to really get circumspect, though, aren't you? You have to set down some things if you're going to climb that mountain. Okay. All right, so as we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. So how many of you had some rather nefarious business acquaintances? Look at who I'm talking to. Pretty much all of us, right? So we might feel a little bit weird about going to them on a spiritual basis, yes? So they're going to talk to us about that. They're going to validate our feeling about that, and then they're going to talk to us about what their experience is. Fair enough? So let us be reassured. To some people, we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. Now, they told you something. I don't need to go emphasize the spiritual feature on the first approach. And if they told me it's going to be a first approach, there's going to be another approach. So people really don't need to hear about my journey of spiritual discovery until I have made right my wrong to them. To their satisfaction, not mine. Does that make sense? Been out there looking for God. Sure sorry about your stereo. See, it's a little silly, right? While you're out there looking for God, did you happen to find my fucking stereo? They don't want to hear about my spiritual discoveries until tangibly I'm changed before them. Does it make sense? Okay. All right. So we might prejudice them. At the moment, we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God. Where's my regulars? When I say God, what do you say? Good work. All right, okay, you stay on it now. To be of maximum service to God and the people about us. Did you know that was our real purpose? How many of you lived an existence, no matter what you kept acquiring, it felt still somehow it lacked purpose? Striving for worldly things. How many of you, when you started striving to deepen your relationship with God by serving His people, never lacked the sense of purpose? It's kind of interesting. Some of you are feeling that. Who's feeling that? Yeah, that's the power we're talking about here. That's happening in you. That's not coming from here. All right, so it is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we've gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? ? So So when they put a question mark in this book, if no one's ever shown you how to read it, because it's a book of testimony, it's a book of their witness, what I need to do is turn every statement they make into a question. And when they put a question mark in there, I need to go see when I've asked myself that question. So if I ever thought, oh, I don't want to say that, I'm going to be branded a religious bore. I'm going to be branded something I don't want to be. I've got a persona that does not allow me to bear witness to God in my life right now. You ever had that? Okay, so that was to a person, they witnessed to that, okay? So, and then it goes on to say, we may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. Just because I can't do it doesn't mean I'm not being obedient. It may be that I'm being obedient, and that's why I can't do it, because it may stop me from carrying a beneficial message in the future, because all they want to know is what's going on with me worldly, not what's going on with me otherworldly. Does it make sense? How many of you have had that same experience where someone just started preaching at you, and you're like, yeah, I've met you sons of bitches before. Yeah. Just show me your sermon. Yeah, okay. But our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. So that was my job, is to come and find out what the wrong, the exact nature of the wrong is, and then have them tell me how I might set it right, yeah? And hopefully I have some idea, because I've copped to what I've found out, what I was like, what happened, what I'm like now, or what I'm hoping to grow into, and I wrote this whole list of how I've harmed people, yeah? All right, so he's going to be more interested in the demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries. We don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. Oh, that lacked enthusiasm. We do not want to shy away from the subject of power, because we may not be God seekers yet, but we are all power seekers. They're interchangeable, folks. The God we serve is a spirit of power. Okay? All right, so when it'll serve any good purpose, we're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. What's that look like? Y'all know me. I didn't stop unless I was locked up or passed out or chained down. That's it. And when they chained me down, they rehabbed me, and I went out and I did it again. And that's who I was, and I was going to die that way. And then one day, pow, I encountered this power, and I have never been the same. And all I'm here to tell you is I don't know how it happened, but I know who made it happen. Tact and common sense, right? Okay, so the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. How many of you got that guy? Some of us don't like to cop to having someone we hate, but it means strongly dislike, right? Okay. So it may be that he's done us more harm than we've done him, and though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we're still not too keen about admitting our faults. So maybe you went through your inventory and you recognize that you've been holding on to some abuse that you suffered, and no one's saying you have a part in the abuse, but your unforgiveness is blocking you off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Make sense? And now I know I want to grow, so I got to leave that baggage behind. Yeah? Okay. So nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. What's that mean? We're going to have to take control of the situation, right? Okay. So it says to it, it acknowledges the fact that it's harder to go to an enemy than to a friend. In fact, the whole book tells you that. They lay it out to the wife, to the family, to the employer. That's the subjective way to grow in the Spirit so that you can go out to the enemy. But you're going to get more benefit from having no enemies than you are getting the continued support of your family. Does it make sense? Okay. So don't try and do something out of order, because you may not be ready. But when you are ready, understand that even the one that you really hate, when you lose that, you're going to be that much freer of you, so you're free to be you. Okay, so then it says we go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. So how does one go to somebody in a helpful and forgiving spirit? Would have to do that, wouldn't I? Because I will need a power greater than me operating through me in order to get to a helpful and forgiving spirit for someone I hate. Any of you ever hated somebody and knew you needed to go make an approach, and you're still thinking like you, but you're acting like him? Not them, but the big him? And you don't believe in a power greater than you operating through you? If you've ever had power to be kinder than you feel like being, you've experienced power that greater than yourself operating through you. And you can improve consciousness of that. And as you improve consciousness of that, you'll become better than you knew you wanted to be. Okay, so then it says, under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. So guess what they did to learn that? They weren't in a helpful and forgiving spirit, and they criticized and argued. And then they had to go back and make amends for the amends they tried to make. Any of you ever had to do that? That's why we might want to follow the preparatory steps. Simply, we tell them we'll never get over drinking until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. Do you believe that? Do you believe that my need to medicate myself is directly tied to the way I've mistreated people or the way I've thought about people and places and institutions? Because if that isn't true for you, then you're probably going to have to go out and take it for a test drive. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were. And once the alcohol, the drugs are out of the way, I've still got to concede my humanity on an ongoing basis. Yeah? Okay, so we're there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so, never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. Do you notice how many times they said the same thing over and over? What do you think that probably means? It's probably how many times they messed it up. Does it make sense? This whole thing is preparatory. This is the fitness step, getting me ready for the big amends. The big amends is the carrying the message, having awakened. What do we awaken to? Depends on what faith tradition you're from, but if you're from a biblical tradition, the reality is I awaken to the fact that I'm dead. So all their assaults have no power over me. Does it make sense? Okay. All right. So then it says, we stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. So they gave us instruction. What's it like to have a calm manner? How many of you have appeared to have a calm manner when you didn't feel calm? Because they were careful to point out our manner is calm. So know this, when you go to face the man you hate, and you're in the helpful and forgiving spirit, you're liable to have shit running down both legs, but you're going to be chill if you're in the spirit. A lot of times people don't tell us the truth about that. But how are you going to know a power greater than you is operating through you until you walk through that fear and act more like him than like you? Okay. All right. So sometimes the man we're calling upon admits, in 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we're calling upon admits his own fault, so feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Don't get into separating things. Rarely means rarely. You probably will make better progress than you think because the emotion tied to the event sometimes will tether us to the event, and when we get a little distance, we'll find we've made progress. Yeah? How many of you had family that you harmed and their amend to you is get out and stay out? Happens. But as I'm able to honor that request and go do what I got to go do, I got a whole family that I've been reintroduced to. The family of man is now my family that I'm supposed to introduce, those people seeking the Lord, right? So I'm going to go busy myself with what God has me doing, and eventually mine will come around. They were really never mine anyway. They were always his. Okay. So our former enemies sometimes praise what we're doing and wish us well, and occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We've made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. So it was my act of faith to go pick up my garbage. That's all that was required of me. That doesn't mean if later they're ready to hear it, and they say, now I'm ready to hear it, that I won't be empowered to go back. It just means I've done all I have to do at this point. Go forth and serve. Make sense? Okay. In other words, we're not responsible for the result. We're responsible for the delivery. Okay. So then they go on to tell us some things about alcoholics, addicts, other things. Most alcoholics owe money. Masters of understatement, aren't they? Anybody get here not owing money? It's like, it just doesn't happen. I had one guy in all the years I've done this says, I didn't owe any money. I said, how did you fucking do that? How did you ever get here without owing money? I mean, this ain't the fraternity we all aspire to as youth. So we do not dodge our creditors. Why'd they tell us that? How many of you in early recovery did spend a lot of time dodging your creditors? And I'm not just talking about financial creditors, people to whom you owed amends. And so now I'm in full avoidance mode every time I see them. Telling them what we're trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. How many of you thought you were really good at covering up your addiction? When you finally admitted it, did you make it unanimous? Oh, thank God she knows. Well, they say that, whether we think so or not. Because remember, I'm a little bit deluded. Not diluted, deluded. Okay. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory that it may cause financial harm. Don't get that twisted. I don't need to go disclose my alcoholism, my addiction to everybody I meet, because that definitely will cause financial harm. They have no obligation to understand my alcoholism. But if my alcoholism and the actions that ensued from that caused them harm, then they are owed an explanation from me that I know that you didn't deserve it, and I just want to let you know that, I know, and you didn't deserve it, and I'm here to set it right to the best of your specification. Make sense? So it says, approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we're sorry. So whatever that looks like to you in the spirit, that people will generally tell you what the best deal you can arrange is, and you let them know that you're going to be repentant and humble. If God gives you a specification for an amend, and you don't have any apparent means to do it, you're going to develop your faith when it all of a sudden materializes for you to make it good. And it will. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go, for we're liable to drink if we're afraid to face them. How many of you have lived in fear of creditors and things like that and know that what they learned? Couldn't open the mail, couldn't answer the door. Any of you had a phone that you look at it? So I might end up twisted off on a bad day because I'm hiding from everything again, right? Okay. So perhaps, I love this one for our crowd. Perhaps we've committed a criminal offense which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. Just the one, yeah. Just that one little misunderstanding. So not everybody has that history, so they're going to talk about whatever else is up, right? So we may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We've already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we're sure we'd be in prison or lose our job if it were known. Do you understand the importance of the fifth step now? I have a trusted friend who already knows about me. I've already practiced my testimony with that person, and I got a non-response because they supported my effort, my search for the truth. And they know that part of that truth is that I mistreated people and how I mistreated people, and they loved me anyway and encouraged me to go out and go forth and make amends, yeah? So I'm practiced now to give the same talk that I already gave in 5. I'm just going to do it again. Yep. All right, so we've already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we're sure we'd be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. So now the ante's up. Now it's just not my ego tied to it or my emotion tied to it. Now my physical freedom might be tied to it. So my faith is going to get deeper, or I'm going to cut and run. Why do you think we said that prayer? God, take all of me, good and bad. I pray that now remove from me everything that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out. You think we did that lightly? This is going to potentially suck. Yeah, okay. All right, so maybe it's only a petty offense such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we're divorced and have remarried but haven't kept up the alimony to number one. She's indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble too. So they're going to give us some general instruction. This is what we want to follow up on. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, so don't get caught up in I never did that and I never did this. Just whatever your reparations are, because none of us get here on a winning streak. Does not happen. Right? So there's going to be reparations regardless. So whatever form they take, we got guiding principles. Isn't that cool? A practical program of action. So here's what we're going to do. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. So the first thing I need to do is go back inward to the well and remind myself that I'm seeking spiritual inebriation, which only comes with spiritual liberation. Does that make sense? I need that ease and comfort, and I need it to come from within. I need to be philosophically comforted. I need it more of the time than not, and the only way that's going to come is for me to subvert the ego and empower the spirit. Okay? So I'm seeking a spiritual experience, right? The goal of 12-step discovery is what? To awaken spiritually, a byproduct of which is perhaps abstinence from worldly things. May not be, but perhaps. How many of you were drinkers? When you were really on one and people offered you food, even if you were really hungry, you didn't want to eat, did you? When you're really on a spiritual high, you aren't going to want to eat of the world. It will be removed from you. Who felt that? All of us drunks, we know. I ain't eating that hamburger. I ain't eating a week, but I'm good. I'm going to throw it up in a minute anyway so I can get more room. Okay. So we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing. The right thing will be indicated, yes? No matter what the personal consequences may be. So they've upped the ante. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink in anything. So they're trying to define for us what any lengths might look like. Yes, you may lose your position or face jail, but if you stay imprisoned in you, you're going back to jail anyway. In fact, you never left jail if you're still imprisoned in you. Does it make sense? We got to get you free of you so you're free to be you, and then wherever you are, you're free. Okay, so usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we're not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life, had secured a position, and was getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." It would have been impressive heroics, wouldn't it? But if my goal is to grow spiritually, is impressive heroics what I'm about? No, I need to consult the Spirit, and I may need to consult another human being to get some perspective first, because that's the way the manner of living is laid out. I may need to go to jail, but why go to jail if I don't need to go? My ministry may not be there. My ministry may be out here, but I need this faith-building exercise. Does it make sense? So even though he had a job and he had a life and he had all those things, they sat him down and they counseled him on what to do instead of just going and throwing himself on the mercy of the court. Some of you that are students of biblical teaching know that we don't go to court. We try and make right to our brethren along the way. Otherwise, we're liable to get the full weight and force of the law. Yeah? I know I didn't quote it right, but I'm not a scripture quoter. I know the author, but he doesn't make me be perfect. So we thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary, but if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. So see, what I thought was impressive heroics wasn't going to do anyone any good anyway. That was just me glorifying me once again. All right, so we suggested he write his first wife, admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and he also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try and do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Let's stop there. Which of those things do you think most impressed the woman who wanted him jailed? We know where you're at. We don't really know where she is at yet. Right? So Carrie Ann, right under the bus you go. There was a whole list of things they did, though. You wouldn't want to leave any out, right? How many of you never really bothered to take ownership of what you were doing? Here's what I have for you now. Here's what I'm going to try and do in the future. I hope someday you can forgive me. And I did none of that to avoid what you have for me. If you still want me to go, I'll go. The entirety of that, right? That's changed behavior. I didn't come here to manipulate this situation. I came here to make it right to your specification, and here's the proof. Yeah? Okay. So says he said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted, and then it says, of course, she did not. Back to my visual of stuff running down both legs. He didn't know that part about, of course, she did not, when he went to throw himself on the mercy of the situation. Yes? All right. So, of course, she did not, and the whole situation has long been adjusted. Before taking drastic action, so this is a review course on the guiding principles. Before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. So who else were the other people involved? The family, the new employer, all those people are going to be let down if this goes bad and he's got to be incarcerated. Then whoever hired him isn't going to have a worker, and the family's not going to have support. So he needed to get their consent before he did that, because now they're enjoined in his spiritual walk. That's who the others are that we're talking about. I've heard people over the years saying, you are others. No. You've got your own column. Stay out of others. I mean, where's my meth addicts? You guys been running around being you and others for a long time, right? I mean, we gotta pare out the numbers. All right. So before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. If we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, ask God to help. Don't assume I can do this without the help of the Spirit. I will not have the willingness to go through with it. And willingness is divine power. By now I know this. Right? So then it says the drastic step is indicated. How do I know a drastic step is indicated? That's a sensory experience everyone in this room has had. Yeah, this is happening, and I am not in agreement with it. And I don't know how I'm going to get in agreement with it, but I am going through it either way. The drastic step is indicated. Yes? Okay, so we all know it. It's sensory, right? So when we get to the other side of it, we know we've been divinely delivered. Do we not? You may not have ever had that pointed out to you, but think about that. I'm talking about the shit that really sucks. I don't want this to happen. And it's happening. And my want to's got nothing to do with this sumbitch. Here, we're going through it. And now I'm on the other side of it, and I'm somehow free. What is that but a redemption or deliverance? I don't have that fear anymore. Okay. All right, so we must not shrink. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story, and then we'll read the rest of the story, and you'll understand, because they don't give you enough detail there to get exactly. So how many of you were in a position where maybe you were doing some construction work for somebody and you got a little front money? Did you ever do it while you were drinking and running and gunning? Did you have an evaporative rate of that money that was like all of a sudden the job's not done, I don't have money for the materials, and don't really want to give the explanation for that shit? So that's what happened to him. I don't want to offer this explanation, so the one I'm going to offer is that sucker's lying. He never gave me that money, except this guy was donating money to him for the church fund. And so he not only defrauded his friend, he defrauded the whole congregation of the church. And that may not matter if you're not church people, but if you've ever been a church people, you know that that's going to make it hard for me to go to church, even though I think I pulled this bullshit off, right? Okay, so now we're going to go on through the rest of it. So he felt he'd done a wrong that he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. What right had he to involve those dependent upon him? So another question mark. So he's got his life sort of in order somehow, but he's always had this disarray, and now his justification for not making it right is I don't have any right to harm my business partner and any of you ever had an anchor to a bad event, but somehow you tell yourself, well, I can't involve them. But I have guiding principles. All I need to do is go discuss with them, right, and see what's up. But, okay. So how could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? Another one, how could I make a public statement exonerating my rival? I'd have to consult the Spirit, wouldn't I? Because the problem is I've defrauded a whole bunch of people I never even saw simply by lying about this guy to a church congregation. How many of you stole the seventh tradition money? Show of hands. Did they make you pay it back? Or we have to cop to that shit. I'm glad. I always feel better when it's not just me. It's like sometimes I think I invite. It makes me feel better, Kenny. You know, I'm amongst brethren. So after consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion it was better to take those risks than stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. So this is where he's letting you know that of the first 100, half of them were religious, the other half were atheists or agnostics. He was more of the religious persuasion. In fact, he never really got into the AA. He stayed with the Oxfords and got with his church. And so you don't really get his name like you do with some others, right? But he's telling you, now he can't go to church, he doesn't do recovery, he's isolated, he's a man on an island. And then it says he saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands or he'd soon start drinking again and all would be lost anyhow. Any of you get to that place in your recovery where you knew if you didn't do something, you were going to have to do something? Not sure what it was, but it was definitely, I got to get a release, yeah? So that's where this cat's at. And he says he attended church for the first time in many years. After the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. You think he felt quieted on the inside when he had to get up before that congregation that he could not face for many years? That's what any links might look like. They're trying to paint a picture. Some of you that have had to go face your church family or went in and embarrassed yourself in church, you know, I feel this man's experience all these years later. Okay. It says his action met widespread approval, and today he's one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. So what they're trying to capture there is the thief of the church fund becomes the most trusted citizen of the town through the power of God. It's a pretty powerful testimony, isn't it? Okay. All right, so the chances are that we have domestic troubles. Anybody? We all start laughing. If we have a domestic, we got troubles, right? All right. So perhaps we're mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. Thank you. Thank you. Were you following Sean there, or are you just filling in for him? Okay. We doubt if in this respect alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people, but drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. Who's denying that? Who doesn't think drinking complicates sex relations in the home? You didn't even know what home you were in. Where's my meth addicts? You didn't even know what species you were in. All right, so after a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, uncommunicative. So that's an obvious observation, right? Any of you go home to somebody that you've been mistreating and just through abuse or abandonment or whatever, and now I'm all better now, I'm sober, and they're worn out, resentful, uncommunicative. You can feel that in the air, right? That's the first thing we see, but now they want me eyesight without insight, spiritual blindness. They want me to go inward, get some perspective, because remember, my insanity is an appalling lack of perspective. I need to see the world through her eyes, or his eyes, depending on what's up, right? So what it says is, how could she be anything else? Given what was presented night after night, year after year, how could they possibly respond any different than worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative? Okay. It says, the husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself, and he commences to look around in the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. So now both of us are seeing the same thing. I'm seeing worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. So is she. In fact, I don't know if I'm seeing hers or mine. Right? Because we've got this thought problem. How can you see the speck in your brother's eye, in your sister's eye, when you can't see the plank in your own eye? So the whole idea is to remove the plank from my eye, which is perspective, and get the other perspective. And then my perspective is larger, and I'm less insane. Make sense? Okay. All right, so perhaps he's having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. How many of you have met her or he? The one who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about a thing like that? So it's really not their level of understanding that's causing my demise, right? It's the fact that I've harmed people, I continue to harm people, and I'm trying to pretend it doesn't matter. Okay. All right, so a man so involved often feels very remorseful at times. Do you relate to that? Men or women? I know they wrote this in the masculine back then because that's how they did things, but we're talking to everybody in the sea of humanity. We do feel remorseful at times when we're mistreating people on the regular, do we not? And what do we do to get rid of that remorse? Drink, smoke, shoot, sniff, screw, whatever we got to do. Okay. There's got to be something to fill this hole. Okay. All right. Not that hole. Whole different topic. Making me blush, Lance. A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who's literally gone through hell for him. So I probably owe a debt greater than I even know to the people who stayed behind and tried to support me through all my insanity, yes? Okay. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. Not you usually have to do something about it. They usually have to do something. They tried to drag their feet and do nothing as long as they could, and they realized as they grew they had to do something about it. They could not live in two worlds. Okay? So if we're sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Wow, that was... How sure are we? We're pretty sure they didn't know about our addiction, too, huh? So this is a matter for the Spirit. It's not a matter for opinion, and it's not to avoid ego assaults on me, but it is to avoid needless harm to others. So we're going to have to consult the Spirit, right? And so not always we think, if she knows in a general way that we've been wild, should we tell her in detail? And some of you have experience with that because that was emphatic. Why don't we tell them in detail? It's not necessary, and it's hard to get rid of the mental picture of detail. You ever asked for detail, got the detail, and now you can't get out of the spin on the detail? Yeah, that's harmful. That's cruel. There's no reason for that. That's just a deflection technique. Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She'll want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. We're sorry for what we've done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that, we cannot do. We have no right to go further. So they talked about all the arguments for why I'm not going to disclose this other person they're demanding to know. How many of you had a similar situation? And were you able to stay grounded and you don't need to know, or did you spill it? I've done it both ways too. So, though there may be justifiable exceptions, and a justifiable exception is any exception that I deem justifiable, because the reality is that's what you're going to do, and then you're going to get the consequences to go with it, right? All right. So, and you might get to stand at a podium and play the fool for everybody. I did that, and here's what I learned. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we've often found this the best course to take. So what they're telling you is sometimes they spilled more information than they should have, and they realized in retrospect they should have got more grounded in the Spirit so they could stand their ground, because the minute I go tell them who it was and all that nonsense, everything deflects from me to them, and I never took ownership of what I did. And I did it to both of them. I didn't do it to one. The one that they want to be mad at, I did it to them too. Right? Okay. All right, so our design for living is not a one-way street. So good for the wife is for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. Yes, good advice. Do not advise of that unless you want a really funny story from a podium. Probably not so funny. It's better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. So they're telling you the same thing I just told you, right? Okay. So perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. So who's an outsider? It's between you and the Spirit. It's not even between the other person. It's between you and the Spirit. And then you're going to have to do with it what you do with it. The same Spirit that takes you to it will take you through it. And you will grow either way. Okay? So it may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we're dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than to risk face-to-face combat. A lot of flowery words to say, look, nobody wants to be told how they should think and feel. So if they're still really burned up about it, then what I need to do is be seeking guidance to be patient and understanding and loving and tolerant and just so reflect a better energy. Does it make sense? And I'm not going to be able to do that without growing in the Spirit. Okay? So if we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. You ever hear that? Hear it all the time in fellowships, don't you? At least I'm sober. Yes, but you're an asshole. So, let's work on that. Let's take that down a notch. Because if all I have to do is stay sober, how come I got sober so many times and didn't stay that way? That's a complete lie that I would tell me. If I don't become better than I was, if I don't become made new, if I don't become something completely different than I once was, I don't stand a chance. Okay. All right, so goes on to say, certainly he must keep sober, for there'll be no home if he doesn't, but he's yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he's so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have had no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. Now think about that. We feel a man is unthinking because I'm not considering all that's been done. How many of you had relationships just tortured through your addiction? How many have had those relationships restored? How many of you know that that was real-world demonstrations of resurrection? It's not something that happened 2,000 years ago. It happens here every day. True? Relationships are revived. Not the old ones, new ones. New freedom. They know the authentic you. Not the one you pretended to be, the real you. And guess what? They love the real you. You don't have to be anyone but you. That's freeing, isn't it? Good. So he's like the farmer who came out of the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife, he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" Everyone chuckles about that, but think about that. How many of you, lost an apartment or something along the way? You didn't really lose it. I mean, they just put a lockbox on the door. They said, "We'll give you your shit back after we auction what's of value." Or what? No? And then all of a sudden you sobered up. I'm good. Ain't it grand? I'm sober. Anyone relate to that now? They may have been clued in that something was amiss. Okay. Yes, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead, and we must take the lead. Why? I had wreckage to clean up, and I'm now moving in this path. I'm building an arch through which I'll walk to freedom, and so this reconstruction is rebuilding one soul at a time. This arch, yes? Okay. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it. How many of you see the past differently now as you're walking and growing in the Spirit? Okay. Being careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. If you'll add that to your prayer life, even if you're not growing, you will start walking in the way. And if you're walking in the way, you're free. It just is. Patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Ask Him in the morning to show you the way, and then your lenses will be cleared. That's what you'll see. You'll see kindness where you used to see who knows what, right? All right. So then it says the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. So somewhere along the way in our fellowships, we lost that. This is not AA works, so work it because you're worth it. No, this is a manner of living, so live it. Because your life depends on it. Does it make sense? I mean, I don't want to make fun of people, but I do. I've listened to that nonsense long enough. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not urge them. Why not? Because none of us want to hear about spiritual principles, so we want to see them. Then when I see them, they're unmistakable, then I'll ask you about them, and then I'll be able to receive what you have to say to me. Okay. So we should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Claim that promise. People will see your change before you see your change, and when they ask if you give credit where credit is due, they will grow in the Spirit, and you will know that they have. So our behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness will make a skeptic out of anyone. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter, and there may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. I'm not going to go through the 9-step promises because we'll do that next week before we look at 10 and 11 because they feed in. But I will tell you, these people that cannot be seen, I've told this one over and over the years, so I apologize for you that have heard it. But when I first came around recovery, there was a guy in recovery, they called him Black Wally. Paul would know him. People that have been around a long time would know him. And Wally would just go do whatever. Wally, he may have been an eloquent fellow, but he went and served. He was a servant. And he I mean, he literally was given a job to open the first real detox in Phoenix because he was breaking into the county yard, stealing vans so he could go pick up drunks and take them to the detox. They said, why don't we just give this sumbitch a van so he'll quit stealing? Well, that's a story a lot of people don't know about Wally. But Wally did those kinds of things, and he would take youngsters like me, and he would take us out in his service things, and we would get to know things. He would go down to the Max secure unit at Madison Street at the time, and no one would go up on those floors with me, but Wally would go. Anyway, I went off the rails at some point after that, and I always kind of felt bad about Wally, how much time he had spent with me, so I thought, well, when I get back to Phoenix or whatever, I need to look old Wally up. By the time I get back, Wally's dead. And so I'm sitting down, going through steps with somebody at a halfway house down in Central Phoenix one time. I'm sitting in the courtyard. I'm taking this young man through his steps. And as I'm looking through his relationships, I find that I am sitting with Black Wally's grandson. So don't worry about what you think can't be made right. All of the 12 step is about making all that right.